John Wayne Gacy, born March 17, 1942, Chicago, Illinois, U.S., died May 10, 1994, Statesville, Illinois, was an American serial killer whose murders of 33 boys and young men in the 1970s received international media attention and shocked his suburban Chicago community, where he was known for his sociability and his performance as a clown at charitable events and children's parties. Born March 17, 1942, Chicago, Illinois, U.S. Died May 10, 1994, Statesville, Illinois, aged 52. A construction worker known by his suburban neighbors as outgoing, John Wayne Gacy was involved in politics and even acted as a clown for birthday parties. He was no clown. Gacy came under suspicion in 1978 when a 15-year-old boy, last seen with him, went missing. That wasn't the only time families of missing boys had pointed fingers at Gacy, but it was the first time authorities took them seriously. Soon after, a search warrant granted police access to the Gacy home, with the smell of nearly 30 bodies buried in a 4-foot crawl space under his home. He was convicted of 33 counts of murder, with additional counts of rape and torture, and was executed by lethal injection in 1994. Gacy was born into a blue-collar family and seems to have had a fairly ordinary childhood. But he exhibited a growing tendency toward sadism, which resulted in several encounters with the law in the 1960s. In 1968, after his conviction for sexually assaulting a teenage boy, he was confined in the Iowa State Men's Reformatory Anamosa State Penitentiary and forced to undergo psychological evaluation. After his release in 1970 and while still on parole, he was again arrested for sexual assault, but the charges were later dropped. Gacy then became a fairly successful independent contractor and bought a house in suburban Chicago. In 1978, after one of Gacy's victims, Robert Peast, was reported missing, police learned that Gacy was the last person known to have seen him. After obtaining a search warrant, police discovered the bodies of 29 boys and young men in or near Gacy's house. 4 other bodies were found in the nearby Des Plaines River. Indeed, the area of the house had emitted a foul stench for years, but Gacy had told his houseguests and his wife that the smell was the result of moisture buildup. At his trial, Gacy's plea of innocent by reason of insanity was supported by the testimony of several psychologists, who diagnosed him as schizophrenic, but was rejected by the jury, which found him guilty of all 33 murders of which he was accused. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994. Childhood. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robison. His father, an auto repair machinist and World War I veteran, struggled with alcoholism and beat John and his 2 sisters with a razor strap if they were perceived to have misbehaved. John's father frequently belittled him, calling him stupid and comparing him disparagingly to his sisters, according to Barry E. Boschelli. Gacy's psychosexual history began between the ages of 6 and 10, when a teenage daughter of one of his mother's friends reportedly undressed and played with him, according to Killer Clown, The John Wayne Gacy Murders by Terry Sullivan. Gacy was molested at a young age by a family friend and contractor, and between ages 10 and 12, Gacy and a friend were accused of sexually fondling a young girl, according to Sullivan. A sickly, overweight, incoordinated child, Gacy was unable to perform at sports or bond with children his own age, according to John Wayne Gacy, Defending a Monster by Sam L. Amirant and Danny Broderick. He suffered alienation at school, unable to play with other children due to a congenital heart condition that was looked upon by his father as another failing. He experienced frequent seizures and blackouts as a teen and was regularly in and out of hospitals, though his father accused him of faking the ailments for attention. Gacy later realized he was attracted to men and experienced great turmoil over his sexuality. Career and family life. Despite not graduating from high school, Gacy attended and graduated from the Northwestern Business College in Chicago, then worked as a salesman and manager at a shoe company. In 1964, he met and became engaged to Marlon Myers, whose father owned 3 KFC restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. Gacy relocated there to manage the restaurants, and he and Myers had 2 children together, according to Buried Dreams, Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer by Tim Cahill and Russ Ewing. Gacy became a self-made building contractor and Democratic precinct captain in the Chicago suburbs in the 1970s. He later speculated his political involvement might have been an attempt to antagonize his father, who mocked his interest in politics. And maybe it was a way to get acceptance, Gacy said, according to Buried Dreams. I was always looking for acceptance, because my dad made me feel that I was never good enough. Well liked in his community, Gacy organized cultural gatherings and was active in political organizations and the Gacy civic group. Gacy later called this the happiest period of his life, and he even earned much coveted praise from his father, who said he had been wrong about Gacy. Back then, I was thinking of running for alderman, Gacy said, according to Buried Dreams. After that, I wanted to go for mayor, and if that worked, I was going to run for the state senate. I didn't see any limits. Gacy was a member of a Chicago area Jolly Joker clown club and frequently performed in clown attire and makeup at children's parties, charity fundraisers, and other events as his alter egos, Pogo the Clown, or Patches the Clown. Years later, during a conversation with detectives while he was under surveillance, Gacy discussed his work as a clown, remarking, "Clowns can get away with murder." In 1968, Gacy was accused of sexually assaulting a teenage boy and attempting to assault another. He vehemently denied these accusations, and some community members believed him over the victim. He persuaded one of his employees to assault the victim in an unsuccessful attempt to stop him from testifying, according to Killer Clown. Gacy was convicted and received a 10-year prison sentence, after which his wife divorced him and received full custody of their children. A model prisoner, Gacy was released on parole in the summer of 1970 after serving 18 months of his sentence. However, Gacy was arrested again the following year after another teen claimed he lured him into his car and drove him to his house, where Gacy tried to force him into sex, according to John Wayne Gacy, defending a monster. The charges were dropped when the boy didn't appear during the trial. With financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a house on 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in Norwood Park, Illinois, where all of his future murders would take place, according to Buried Dreams. In 1971, Gacy started a construction business called PDM Contractors, which grew rapidly and became financially successful. Also that year, Gacy also became engaged to Carol Hoff, who he briefly dated in high school. The two were married in 1972. Most of his employees at PDM Contractors were high school students and young men, who he would proposition for sex, sometimes under the threat of violence. Nevertheless, Gacy kept up a public front as a community man, hosting summer parties that were popular and well attended, according to Buried Dreams. Gacy committed his first known murder in January 1972, after luring the 16-year-old Timothy McCoy to his house for sex. The next morning, Gacy saw McCoy standing in the bedroom doorway with a knife and rushed to attack him, wrestling the knife away and stabbing McCoy to death. Afterward, Gacy belatedly realized that McCoy hadn't been attacking or threatening Gacy but rather was holding the knife because he had just made them breakfast. Nevertheless, Gacy discovered he received sexual gratification from killing McCoy, and later said, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill," according to Buried Dreams. Another of Gacy's victims was John Butkovich, an 18-year-old PDM employee, whom Gacy lured to his house with a promise to discuss overdue pay. Once there, Gacy gave him alcohol, tricked him into putting handcuffs on, and then strangled him, according to The Man Who Killed Boys, the John Wayne Gacy Jr. story by Clifford L. Linedecker. The use of handcuffs became a frequent method for Gacy, who would sometimes tell his victims he was showing them a magic trick. Butkovich's parents were suspicious of Gacy and called the police more than 100 times, urging them to investigate him further, according to Linedecker. By the middle of the 1970s, two more young men accused Gacy of rape, and he was questioned by police about the disappearances of others. Gacy referred to this period of his life as his cruising years, when he committed most of his murders. Most of his victims were buried on the property, with several placed in a common grave underneath his crawl space. One of his victims, a 17-year-old PDM employee named Gregory Godzik, told his family that Gacy had earlier ordered him to dig trenches in the crawl space at his home. Gacy later told police he arranged this work to create space for graves, according to John Wayne Gacy, defending a monster. After Godzik went missing, his family contacted Gacy, who told them that Godzik had confided to Gacy that he planned to run away from home. Gacy killed several more victims during this time period. One he left alive was Robert Donnelly, a 19-year-old college student he abducted from a Chicago bus stop. After bringing him to his house, Gacy and tortured Donnelly, dunking his head repeatedly in a bathtub until he passed out and performing fake executions with a gun loaded with banks. Donnelly was in so much pain he begged Gacy to kill him, but Gacy let him go and warned him not to tell anybody. Donnelly reported him to the police, however. When officers investigated, Gacy said it was a consensual, sex slavery, encounter, and the police believed him, according to Buried Dreams. Gacy killed another victim 1 month later. By 1978, Gacy, crawl space had no more space for bodies, according to Killer Clown, and he started to dispose of his victims in the Des Plaines River from a bridge off Interstate 55. On December 11, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Peast went missing after telling his mother he was going to meet Gacy to discuss a potential construction job. Peast's family filed a missing person report with the police, which led to a search of Gacy's house in Norwood Park. Authorities discovered several suspicious items there, including police badges, a pistol, hypodermic needles, pornographic films, and items that they later learned belonged to some of Gacy's victims. After a lengthy period of police surveillance and investigation, police discovered a receipt in Gacy's house that had belonged to Peast, contradicting Gacy's claim that he had no contact with Peast the day he went missing, according to John Wayne Gacy, defending a monster. This resulted in further searches of Gacy's house, eventually leading to the discovery of several trenches filled with human remains in the crawl space beneath his house. Gacy eventually confessed to killing about 30 people. In 1979, months after Gacy's arrest, his house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park, Illinois was dismantled in an effort to find more evidence. The following year, the house and all structures on the property were demolished, and a new house was eventually built on the property. According to one worker involved in the demolition of Gacy's house, if the devil's alive, he lived here. Gacy's trial began on February 6, 1980. With Gacy having confessed to the crimes, the arguments were focused on whether he could be declared insane and thus remitted to a state mental facility. Gacy spent hundreds of hours with doctors at the Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois, and underwent a series of psychologist tests, according to Buried Dreams. Gacy tried to argue he had multiple personality disorder and that his mind was split between the personalities of a contractor, clown, politician, and police officer named Bad Jack. Gacy claimed, Bad Jack hated homosexuality and viewed male prostitutes and some of Gacy's victims as scum, weak, stupid, and degraded, according to Buried Dreams. Gacy pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and he went to trial on 33 murder charges. The prosecution argued Gacy was sane and in control of his actions, pointing to the elaborate steps Gacy took to both prepare for and conceal his murders. These were certainly the acts of a man capable of premeditation, acting in his own best interest under duress, and recollecting the details of his criminal activities, said Chief Prosecutor William Kunkel, according to Killer Clown. Mental health professionals testified for both sides about Gacy's mental state. On March 12, 1980, after a short jury deliberation, Gacy was found guilty of committing 33 murders, and he became known as one of the most ruthless serial killers in American history. While at Menard, Gacy took up studying the visual arts, especially painting. His paintings were shown to the public via an exhibition at a Chicago gallery. Many of his paintings depict Gacy as Pogo the Clown. In 2017, Mullock's Auctions in Shropshire, United Kingdom, auctioned off several of Gacy's artworks, as well as crime scene pictures from Gacy's trial. Gacy was imprisoned at the Menard Correctional Center in Chester for 14 years, appealing the sentence and offering contradictory statements on the murders in interviews. Although he had previously confessed, Gacy later denied being guilty of the charges and had a 900 telephone number set up with a 12-minute recorded statement declaring his innocence. After the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear Gacy's final appeal in October 1993, an execution date was set for May 10, 1994 at the Stateville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois. Before his death, Gacy said the victims' families would get no comfort from his death and accused the state of murdering him. His last words were reportedly, "Kiss my A," but the prosecutor who tried the case and attended his execution said Gacy didn't speak in his final moments. Gacy was executed by lethal injection. In the years since Gacy's arrest, there have been lingering concerns that Gacy might have been responsible for the deaths of other people whose bodies have yet to be found. And when police uncovered human remains in Gacy's house in 1978, 8 bodies couldn't be identified. In July 2017, Cook County authorities used DNA evidence to identify one of these unidentified victims as 16-year-old James, Jimmy Byron Hawkinson, who had been reported missing since 1976. In October 2021, DNA testing identified another of Gacy's victims as 21-year-old Francis Wayne Alexander, who also disappeared in 1976. A 1992 television movie titled To Catch a Killer explored the efforts to find out what happened to the missing teenage boys who were later discovered to be among Gacy's victims. The movie starred Brian Dennehy, Michael Riley, and Margot Kidder, and Dennehy, who played Gacy, was nominated for an Emmy Award. According to Dennehy, Gacy wrote a letter to him from prison, protesting his portrayal in the film and proclaiming his innocence. Netflix released Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes on April 20, 2022. Featuring interviews with people involved with the case and archival audio footage from Gacy's incarceration, it is the second entry in Netflix's Conversations with a Killer documentary series, the first of which focused on serial killer Ted Bundy.
Tonight in News Extra, the man who committed what may be the crime of the century. His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing 33 innocent people and destroying hundreds of lives. He's never talked to anyone about the case until tonight. His murder spree was first discovered on a cold December day, when the first of his victims were found in the crawl space beneath his home. They were taken out one by one as the world watched. For 13 years, Gacy refused to talk. But tonight, he's breaking that silence.
As you come on to the page, kindly hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. And don't forget to put on the notification bell, so you can be notified when I drop the next video. Thank you.
Walking out from death row in Menard State Prison to speak one-on-one with Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter is here now to tell us what Gacy had to say in an exclusive interview. Walter.
Quite a bit. Bill, I spent 2.5 hours with John Gacy listening to a whole new story about his case. He was rambling and often inconsistent, but always very cagey. 13 years ago, he told the police how he murdered his victims. Now he's telling me he never did.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to convince or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Those are the words of John Wayne Gacy, pleading innocence from death row at Menard State Penitentiary 13 years after being convicted of his crimes. The most notorious serial killer of our time.
When they paint the image that I was this monster who picked up like these altar boys along the street and swatted them like flies, I said, this is ludicrous.
But the jury didn't find it ludicrous. After barely 2 hours deliberation, its verdict was murder by Gacy, 33 times. 29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale. A crime of horrendous proportion. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic. Dug up a few days before Christmas and carried into the December cold, one after another after another. But despite all this evidence, he says he has proof he didn't do it. Here's one of dozens of examples of what he calls proof.
I've taken 3.5 hours of truth serum, and under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have, it shows that I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever. Never have had.
But this is where his attempt to change history, which is what he thinks will get him a new trial, begins to break down. There is no proof anywhere that he ever took truth serum. Now, it's not only a matter of physical evidence, it's a character issue as well. Many times during our interview, he tried to portray himself as a good guy, an ethical, hard-working family man. Here's how he describes himself as a father.
Loving and caring. I've always looked after my children, even now.
What kind of values do you remember imparting to them?
The kind of values?
Were you strict with them too?
No, not as strict as, no. A lot of things that my dad did, I refused to do, because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in spoiling a child either. My values are such that if you give enough love to the children...
You're accused of murdering 33 kids, and you say you didn't believe in hitting. I mean...
Well, anybody that knows... You see, first of all, you're basing this garbage on what you've heard of me.
And what the jury said, and what the courts of appeal have said. And the prosecutor who put him in jail says Gacy is a ruthless and sadistic killing machine.
He's responsible. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it in advance, and he carried it out, and he enjoyed it.
And he admitted it. In fact, boasted of it to the police. But now, 14 years later, he's denying it and talking to me about it. What does Prosecutor Kunkel think of that?
He's a desperate man. He's going to die in 2 or 3 years. He's going to be executed when the law is finally carried out. And he'll clutch at any straw.
2.5 hours of clutching at straws, cunning and manipulative denials. But if you listen carefully, you catch him slipping up. About John Bukovic, for instance, his second victim.
What happened to, what happened in the Bukovic case? Where was he picked up, and how did he get to the house, and what happened with him?
I don't want to go into the other, the 5 that I know about. Just take it that I didn't. Bukovic is not one that I killed, so I don't know nothing about him. The little bit that I know about him is that he was an employee of mine. See, when you look about this recall business, and
I'm not a prosecutor, John, but you just
I know you're not.
Bukovic
Wait a minute.
is not one that you killed, which suggests that maybe in fact there were others that you did kill. I mean, I'm not.
Okay, I'm sorry if I led you to believe. No, strike it then. That is wrong.
But it's too late to strike it. There are others he killed, children he lured into his home anyway who didn't get out alive. When he was arrested, he told the police what he did and how he did it, with a rope that he used as a tourniquet. Now he says he didn't do it, and shows me his rope trick to explain how the police misunderstood. That and more of what he's twisting into his pleas of innocence tomorrow. Linda, Bill?
Fascinating, Walter. Look forward to tomorrow.
When detectives asked Gacy if there were more victims, he replied, "That's for you guys to find out." From 1972 to 1978, serial killer John Wayne Gacy abducted and murdered 33 teenage boys and young men in and around Chicago. In addition to those he killed, Gacy had a history of sexual violence going back to the 60s, when he was arrested for sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys and sentenced to 10 years in prison for sodomy, for which he only served 18. Gacy passed himself off as an upstanding member of his community. He was known as a successful businessman, served as a precinct captain in the local Democratic Party and performed for children at charity events as Pogo the Clown, earning him the nickname, the Killer Clown. To ensnare his victims, Gacy would pose as a police officer, offer to pay for sex or simply invite young men to come over to smoke pot and drink beers at his home in the northwestern Chicago suburbs. Once there, he would handcuff and subdue them, torture them throughout the night and ultimately strangle them. In most cases, he buried them in the crawl space underneath the house. 26 of his victims were found there, neatly buried on top of each other, when he was finally arrested on December 21, 1978. While most of those Gacy killed have been identified through dental records and DNA, police continue to search for the identities of 6 of his victims. The possibility also exists that Gacy is responsible for murders police are unaware of. Following the discovery of the bodies on his property, Detective Rafael Tovar asked Gacy if there were more victims, to which he replied, "That's for you guys to find out." Gacy told investigators his first murder victim was a teenage boy he picked up outside Chicago's Greyhound bus station in the winter of 1972. Unlike his later victims, who were strangled, Gacy said he stabbed the boy in the chest. He was also the first of his victims to be buried in the crawl space beneath his house. In 1986, dental records identified him as 15-year-old McCoy, who had been traveling for the holidays and had a bus layover in Chicago. Unidentified victim, 1974. Gacy said he next murdered in 1974, and it is assumed his second victim was an unidentified white male, whose body was found buried in his backyard. The victim was between 14 and 18 years of age, and it's estimated he died between 1972 and 1975. Bukovic, 17, was one of several employees of Gacy's construction company, PDM Contractors, who fell victim to his boss's bloodthirsty desires. He went missing after going to Gacy to pick up a paycheck, and his remains were later found underneath the concrete floor of his garage. Darrell Sampson, April 6, 1976. In March 1976, Gacy's divorce from his second wife, Carol Hoff, was finalized. With the house all to himself, his murderous impulses were unchecked. Sampson, 18, was the first victim of this 2-year blood run. His body was later found buried underneath the dining room of Gacy's house. Randall Reffitt, May 14, 1976. Reffitt, 15, was last seen walking home from school. His body was later found in Gacy's crawl space, dead from asphyxiation. Sam Stapleton, May 14, 1976. Gacy said second victim in a single day. Sam Stapleton was just 14 when he disappeared on the way home from his sister's apartment. He was buried with Randall Reffitt in Gacy's crawl space. Michael Bonin, June 3, 1976. Bonin, 17, was found buried in the crawl space with the ligature that was used to strangle him still around his neck. William Carroll, June 13, 1976. Known to his friends as Billy, the 16-year-old was found buried in Gacy's crawl space. Unidentified victim, summer 1976. It's assumed this victim was murdered between June and August 1976 due to his burial location in the crawl space. He was a white male between 23 and 30 years of age, who was missing his top two front teeth and wore a removable denture. James Hawkinson, August 5, 1976. Unknown victims, 16-year-old Jimmy Hawkinson was identified in July 2017 thanks to DNA evidence. He had run away from his home in St. Paul, Minnesota, in the summer of 1976, but called them on August 5th of that year to tell them he was in Chicago. It was the last they would ever hear from him. Rick Johnston, August 6, 1976. Johnston, 17, was last seen going to a rock concert at Chicago's Aragon Ballroom. Afterwards, he was supposed to call his mother for a ride home, but she never heard from him. His dead body was found in a stack with Hawkinson and another unidentified victim. Unidentified victim, summer or fall 1976. This unknown victim was between 18 to 22 years old and had dental problems at the time of his death. Unidentified victim, summer or fall 1976. This unidentified white male was between 15 to 24 years old at the time of his death. Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino, October 25, 1976. Friends Parker, 16, and Marino, 14, were last seen hanging out together on Chicago's North Side, and they were reported missing by their parents the following day. They were strangled and buried together and later identified by their dental records. In 2014, Sherry Marino, Michael's mother, had both bodies exhumed and claims DNA tests show that the remains given to her are not her son's, who she believes is still alive. Meanwhile, the Cook County Sheriff's Office and medical examiner stand by their findings. William Bundy, October 26, 1976. Bundy, 19, occasionally worked for PDM contractors and went missing one night after telling his family he was going to a party. Though his family had always suspected he was one of the victims found in Gacy's crawl space, his remains weren't identified until 2011 when his surviving siblings provided DNA samples to police. Gregory Godzik, December 12, 1976. Godzik, 17, had only worked for PDM for a short time before he went missing after dropping a girl off from a date. His wallet was found during a search of Gacy's home, and it was later confirmed that his remains were among those found in the crawl space. John Schitz, January 20, 1977. Known as Johnny to his friends and family, the 19-year-old was another PDM employee who went missing and whose remains were later found in the crawl space. Unidentified victim, winter 1977. This unknown white male was between 22 to 33 years of age and was found in possession of a key fob with the name, Greg, on it. John Prestige, March 15, 1977. Michigan native Prestige was visiting friends in Chicago when he had the misfortune of crossing paths with Gacy. The 20-year-old's body was later found in the crawl space. Unidentified victim, spring or summer 1977. At some point before his death, this unknown white male had his left clavicle broken and was between 17 and 21 years old. Matthew Bowman, July 5, 1977. Bowman, 19, was found in Gacy's crawl space with the rope used to strangle him still wrapped around his neck. Robert Gilroy, September 15, 1977. Gilroy, 18, was the son of a sergeant on the Chicago Police Department, who lived 4 blocks away from Gacy at the time of his disappearance. John Mowry, September 25, 1977. Mowry was a 19-year-old U.S. Marine who was studying to become an accountant. According to CBS Chicago, he had gone to Gacy's house to inquire about work and never returned. Russell Nelson, October 17, 1977. A 22-year-old University of Minnesota architecture student, Nelson traveled to Chicago with a friend, and he was last seen at a dance club when he went missing. His remains were later found in the crawl space. Robert Winch, November 10, 1977. Originally from Kalamazoo, Michigan, Winch was just 16 years old when he was murdered. His remains were later found in the crawl space. Tommy Bowling, November 18, 1977. A 20-year-old father of one, Bowling was found in Gacy's crawl space, dead from strangulation. David Talsma, December 9, 1977. Like John Mowry, Talsma was a 19-year-old U.S. Marine. He was identified on what would have been his 21st birthday. William Kindred, February 16, 1978. Kindred was 19 years old and was the last of Gacy said his victims buried in the crawl space beneath his house. Timothy O'Rourke, June 1978. Only 20 years old at the time of his death, O'Rourke was the first of 4 victims Gacy dumped from a bridge into Illinois' Des Plaines River, after his crawl space had become too crowded with dead bodies. Frank Landingen, November 4, 1978. Landingen's body was discovered in the Des Plaines River. The Washington Post reported a pair of underwear had been stuffed in the 19-year-old's mouth, and investigators determined he had died from strangulation, not drowning. James Matsara, November 24, 1978. Matsara was 20 years old when he went missing on Thanksgiving Day 1978. He was later found in the Des Plaines River, and evidence found in Gacy's home tied him to the crime, according to the New York Times. Robert Peast, December 11, 1978. Gacy's final victim was 15-year-old Robert Peast. Prior to his disappearance, he had been seen in the pharmacy where he worked talking to Gacy about a summer job at PDM. Police began investigating Gacy after learning about his history of sexual abuse, leading to the search of his home and the discovery of 29 of his 33 victims. Peast, however, was not among those found. During their courtship, Gacy joined the local chapter of the Jaycees. That same year, he had his second homosexual experience. According to Gacy, a colleague in the Jaycees plied him with drinks and invited him to spend the evening on his sofa. The colleague then performed oral sex on him while he was drunk. By 1965, Gacy had risen to the position of vice president of the Springfield Jaycees 16 and was named the third most outstanding Jaycee in Illinois. Menard Correctional Center. Gacy committed all of his known murders inside his ranch-style house. Typically, he would lure a victim to his home and dupe them into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick. He would then rape and torture his captive before killing his victim. Childhood. John Wayne Gacy was born at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, Illinois, on March 17, 1942, the second of 3 children and only son of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Robison. His father was an auto repair machinist and World War I veteran, and his mother was a homemaker. Gacy was of Polish and Danish ancestry, and his family was Catholic. Gacy was close to his mother and 2 sisters, but had a difficult relationship with his father, an alcoholic who was verbally and physically abusive to his family. The elder Gacy frequently belittled his son, calling him dumb and stupid, and comparing him unfavorably with his sisters. Gacy said his earliest childhood memories was of his father beating him at age 4 for accidentally disarranging car engine components. 11. His mother tried to shield her son from his father's abuse, which resulted in accusations that he was a sissy and a mama's boy who would probably grow up queer. 4. 8. 12. In 1949, Gacy said his father whipped him after he and another boy were caught sexually fondling a young girl. 13. The same year, a family friend began to occasionally molest Gacy. Gacy never told his father, afraid that his father would blame him. Despite their challenging relationship, Gacy loved his father, but felt he was never good enough in his father's eyes. Gacy was an overweight and unathletic child. Because of a heart condition, he was told to avoid sports. 2. In the 4th grade, Gacy began to experience blackouts. He was hospitalized on occasion because of these episodes and also, in 1957, for a burst appendix. 16. Gacy later estimated that between the ages of 14 and 18, he had spent almost a year in hospital. He attributed the decline of his grades to missing school. 1. Gacy's medical condition was never conclusively diagnosed. His father suspected he was malingering. On one occasion, he openly accused his son of faking as he lay in a hospital bed. Career origins. In 1960, at age 18, Gacy became involved in politics, working as an assistant precinct captain for a local Democratic Party candidate. This led to more criticism from his father, who called him a patsy. Same year, his father bought him a car. He kept the vehicle's title in his own name until Gacy had paid for it, which took several years. His father would confiscate the keys if Gacy did not do as he said. In April 1962, Gacy purchased an extra set of keys. In response, his father removed the distributor cap, keeping the component for 3 days. 12 hours after his father replaced the cap, Gacy left home and drove to Las Vegas, Nevada, with $136 to his name in the hope of residing with a cousin. Gacy worked in the Las Vegas ambulance service before being transferred to Palm Mortuary. He worked as a mortuary attendant for 3 months, observing morticians embalming bodies and occasionally serving as a pallbearer. He slept on a cot behind the embalming room and later confessed that one evening, while alone, he clambered into the coffin of a teenage male, embracing and caressing the body before experiencing a sense of shock. This experience prompted Gacy to return home. Shortly thereafter, Gacy enrolled at Northwestern Business College, despite having failed to complete high school. He graduated in 1963 and took a management trainee position with the Nunn-Bush Shoe Company. In 1964, the company transferred him to Springfield, Illinois, to work as a salesman, and eventually promoted him to department manager. In March of that year, he became engaged to Marlon Myers, a co-worker. During their courtship, Gacy joined the local chapter of the Jaycees. By 1965, Gacy had risen to the position of vice president of the Springfield Jaycees and was named the third most outstanding Jaycee in Illinois. KFC manager. Gacy and Myers married in September 1964. Marlon's father subsequently purchased 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken (KFC) restaurants in Waterloo, Iowa. The couple moved there so Gacy could manage the restaurants, with the understanding that they would move into Marlon's parents' former home. The offer was lucrative. Gacy would receive $15,000 per year, the equivalent of about $153,000 as of 2024, plus a share of the restaurant's profits. Gacy opened a club in his basement where his employees could drink alcohol and play pool. Although Gacy employed teenagers of both sexes, he socialized only with the males. Gacy gave many of them alcohol before he made sexual advances. If they rebuffed him, he would claim his advances were jokes or a test of morals. His wife gave birth to a son in February 1966 and a daughter in March 1967. Gacy later described this period of his life as perfect. He had finally earned his father's approval. When his parents visited in July 1966, his father privately apologized for the abuse he had inflicted before happily saying, "Son, I was wrong about you," as he shook his hand. In Waterloo, Gacy joined the local Jaycees chapter, 26 regularly offering extended hours to the organization in addition to the 12 and 14-hour days he worked managing the restaurants. At meetings, Gacy often provided fried chicken and insisted on being called Colonel. He and other Waterloo Jaycees were also deeply involved in drug abuse, pornography, prostitution and wife swapping. Although Gacy was considered ambitious and a braggart, the Jaycees held him in high regard for his fundraising work. In 1967 he was named Outstanding Vice President of the Waterloo Jaycees 16 and served on the board of directors. In August 1967, Gacy sexually assaulted 15-year-old Donald Voorhees Jr., the son of Donald Edwin Voorhees, a local politician and fellow Jaycee. Gacy lured Voorhees to his house with the promise of showing him heterosexual stag films regularly played at Jaycee events. Gacy plied Voorhees with alcohol, allowed him to watch a stag movie, then persuaded him to engage in mutual oral sex, adding, "You have to have sex with a man before you start having sex with women." Over the following months Gacy abused several other youths, including one whom he encouraged to have sex with his own wife before blackmailing him into performing oral sex on him. Gacy also tricked several teenagers into believing he was commissioned to conduct homosexual experiments for scientific research, and paid them up to $50 each. In March 1968, Voorhees told his father that Gacy had sexually assaulted him. Voorhees Sr. immediately informed the police, who arrested Gacy and charged him with performing oral sodomy on Voorhees and the attempted assault of 16-year-old Edward Lynch. Gacy vehemently denied the charges and demanded to take a polygraph test. The results of these tests were indicative of deception. Gacy publicly denied any wrongdoing and insisted the charges were politically motivated. Voorhees Sr. had opposed Gacy's nomination for appointment as president of the Iowa Jaycees. Several fellow Jaycees found Gacy's story credible and rallied to his support. However, on May 10, 1968, Gacy was indicted on the sodomy charge. The most striking aspect of the test results is the patient's total denial of responsibility for everything that has happened to him. He can produce an alibi for everything. He presents himself as a victim of circumstances and blames other people who are out to get him. The patient attempts to assure a sympathetic response by depicting himself as being at the mercy of a hostile environment. Section of report detailing Gacy's 1968 psychiatric evaluation. On August 30th, Gacy promised one of his employees, 18-year-old Russell Schroeder, $300 if he physically assaulted Voorhees in an effort to discourage the boy from testifying in court. Schroeder lured Voorhees to an isolated park, sprayed mace in his eyes, then beat him. Voorhees escaped and reported Schroeder's actions to police. Schroeder was arrested the next day. Initially denying involvement, he soon confessed to assaulting Voorhees, indicating he had done so at Gacy's request. Police arrested Gacy and charged him with hiring Schroeder to assault and intimidate Voorhees. On September 12th, Gacy was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation at the Psychiatric Hospital of the University of Iowa. 2 doctors concluded he had an antisocial personality disorder. The clinical term for sociopathy and/or psychopathy was unlikely to benefit from treatment, and that his behavior pattern was likely to bring him into repeated conflict with society. The doctors concluded Gacy was mentally competent to stand trial. On November 7, 1968, Gacy pleaded guilty to 1 count of sodomy in relation to Voorhees, but not guilty to the charges related to other youths. He claimed Voorhees had offered himself to him and that he had acted out of curiosity. His story was not believed. Gacy was convicted of sodomy on December 3 and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, to be served at the Anamosa State Penitentiary. That same day, Gacy's wife petitioned for divorce, requesting she be awarded the couple's home and property, sole custody of their 2 children, and alimony. The court ruled in her favor, and the divorce was finalized on September 18, 1969. Gacy never saw his first wife or children again. During his incarceration, Gacy rapidly acquired a reputation as a model prisoner. Within months of his arrival, he had risen to the position of head cook. He also joined the inmate JC chapter and increased its membership from 50 to 650 men in less than 18 months. Gacy secured an increase in the inmates' daily pay in the prison mess hall and supervised several projects to improve conditions for inmates, including the installation of a miniature golf course. And he was presented with a Distinguished Service Award for his efforts within the inmate JC chapter in February 1970. In June 1969, Gacy was denied parole. To prepare for a second scheduled parole hearing in May 1970, he completed 16 high school courses, obtaining his diploma in November 1969. On Christmas Day 1969, his father died from cirrhosis. When informed of his father's death, Gacy collapsed to the floor, sobbing. His request for supervised compassionate leave to attend the funeral was denied. Gacy was granted parole with 12 months probation on June 18, 1970, having served 18 months of his 10-year sentence. Conditions of his probation included a nightly curfew and that Gacy relocate to Chicago to live with his mother. On his release, Gacy told friend and fellow JC Clarence Lane, who picked him up from the prison and had remained steadfast in his belief of his innocence, that he would never go back to jail, and that he intended to re-establish himself in Waterloo. However, within 24 hours, Gacy had relocated to Chicago. He arrived there by bus on June 19th and shortly thereafter obtained a job as a short-order cook. On February 12, 1971, Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy who claimed that he had lured him into his car at Chicago's Greyhound bus terminal and driven him to his home, where he had attempted to force the boy into sex. The court dismissed this complaint when the boy failed to appear. On June 22, Gacy was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual battery and reckless conduct, in response to a complaint filed by a youth who claimed that Gacy had flashed a sheriff's badge, lured him into his car, and forced him to perform oral sex. 43 these charges were dropped after the complainant attempted to blackmail Gacy. The Iowa Board of Parole did not learn of these incidents. His parole ended on October 18, 1971. And a month later the records of his criminal convictions in Iowa were sealed. With financial assistance from his mother, Gacy bought a ranch-style house at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue in unincorporated Norwood Park Township, Illinois, part of metropolitan Chicago. He lived there until his arrest in December 1978 and, according to Gacy, committed all his murders there.
As you leave the page, don't forget to hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. Thank you for watching.